me say the Mama Podcast.
Mama Podcast.
Hi Mama, you're listening to the Mama Podcast. It's Sumaya here, the co-founder of Mama Emmy app. Mama Emmy is the first app to exclusively connect mothers across the Middle East, connect with like-minded mamas and create lifelong friendships. At Mama, we are all about connecting mamas to empower women. So let's join together and make this mission a reality.
In this week's episode, I am joined by the wonderful Momina. She is a certified functional medicine health coach and she specialises in paediatrics. We talk all about gut health and everything else to help maintain a healthy child. So let's get stuck right in.
Welcome, Momina, to the Mama Podcast. I'm so happy to have you with me.
Thank you. I'm really excited as well.
So, your journey has been really interesting, and I know you shared it with me, but I think it'll be great to start off with actually sharing your journey with how you got to becoming a health coach, and more specifically, why Pediatric Health Coach, just for our listeners so they can understand what got you there.
Yeah, so I got into the health coaching space through my own journey of dealing with autoimmune disease. And so I had my son, and then I think 6 months after that, I had like a really bad bout of pneumonia, which seemed to have triggered a cascade of autoimmune conditions. And just really struggling for 2.5 years of going to doctors and trying to figure out what was wrong, just going and getting all manner of tests done where they did not have any other tests to run on me anymore. So it was pretty comprehensive and nothing was wrong. But I just was feeling worse every single day. In addition to having to take care of an infant, it was a struggle bus every single day. There was depression and there was brain fog. And then there was just on top of that, like all of the headaches and migraines. So it was quite debilitating. And I reached a point where I thought, okay, conventional care does not have the answer for this. So I really need to go and start looking where else I can seek out some answers. And that's really where functional medicine came in. And I think one of the first steps that in functional medicine that we do, which is really looking at your whole body in a very integrative, holistic way. So we look at not just what's physiologically happening, but things like sleep and mood and relationships and antecedents. So basically what my genetics look like, what my parents went through, what their body and their illnesses, etc. are like. And kind of just looking at all of that. And we started off with just putting me on a simple elimination diet to see, if we can just give a reset with food triggers and food sensitivities. And really that was like the aha moment, right? When I went off of gluten and dairy, within days, I felt like I was looking at life with a new spectrum. Like it just looked so bright and everything was making sense. I could hear birds chirp outside of like our apartment. It was different. And it was something that I had forgotten about. And that kind of led me down this path of, if this helped me, like imagine how many other people it can help. And so that's where I went into the functional medicine health coaching program to help families and help people just understand, that there are firstly options available to help them. And then that we're there and that there's someone there with them to kind of hold their hand through the whole journey. Because a lot of times we go to doctors, we only see them for, if we're lucky, maybe 10 minutes. And they give us like this huge list of things to do and we're on our way and we are kind of overwhelmed. And I remember being overwhelmed when I had to go on my, elimination diet. Like what all do I cut out? What foods have these triggering ingredients in them? Like, is there gluten in everything? Is there milk in everything? Can I eat chocolate chips? Can I have soy sauce? Like small things like that. And just being cognizant about those things because they were having a big impact on my health. And so just starting off with that journey and getting on that year-long course, initially I wasn't sure whether I wanted to work with a pediatric population or what my niche was going to be. But as I dug deeper and kind of tried to see where my inspiration and where I feel the most excited working with, and that population was just children. And not just small children, but even adolescents and in their teens and then late teens, just working with that population. I feel like I get along with them so well. It's like a blast. So, and I've always worked with that group. I've worked with pregnant women and children in my previous life. So when I was a public health researcher, and so it was just something that I naturally gravitated towards. I've been in the works of kind of figuring out what kind of a nonprofit children's hospital to set up in Pakistan, where I'm originally from. So it just kind of made sense, right? Working with children and just trying to help. And then the more that I started digging into the need for being a pediatric coach, firstly, there aren't too many of us. And then the few of us that we are, like, the problems in children are just exponential right now. We have kids, we're basically in a generation now where our kids are called the compromised generation. And that's scary, because they're saying for the first time, our kids' generation will be the first to have shorter lifespans than us parents.
Oh, wow.
And that's scary.
And that's because of the health conditions that they're now dealing with?
So there are a lot of chronic illnesses. So before, if you looked in like the early 1900s or all the way up to maybe even like the 60s, the 70s, there were a lot of infectious diseases. And that's what was either killing our children and the grown-ups. But as time has gone by, the diseases have shifted, and they're more in like chronic illness. And what do I call chronic illness? We have kids now with diabetes, with asthma, with autism, with ADHD. We have kids with MS. We have kids with other neurodegenerative disorders. We have kids with just so many intolerances and insensitivities to food. We've got kids with allergies to hay or to grass or to dust. There's so much eczema going on with our kids, and we just don't know why. And so that's where like this entire paradigm has come in, where functional medicine is really focusing on giving an alternative answer to parents to help.
Yeah, and I think, so I've discussed my journey with you. So I just want to take you back a few steps and just ask you firstly, how old is your son now? So how long did you actually have to suffer with your own autoimmune, was it an autoimmune condition?
Yes. So, and the funny thing about my autoimmune was that every doctor I went to, every specialty, they had a different name, but it all fell under autoimmune. So everyone said I had a different kind.
Okay.
But my son now, he turns 4 in November. So this entire journey started when he wasn't yet 1. I think it's exactly 3 years ago today. And I started my my elimination diet last year. So I think it was March or April. And to say that it's been a quick turnaround would be hard, because it's been work, right? To really just change your entire diet, your lifestyle. It takes work, and it's hard. Like going out to restaurants, etc., is not so easy anymore. Bringing in certain products at home is not easy anymore, right? We go to birthday parties and dinners, and people have to make adjustments. And now more likely, my son is dairy free. We don't give him milk, and we kind of limit his gluten intake. But even for him, like going out to parties and friends and play dates, we have to be careful with what we're giving him. And so it takes work. And with him, it was almost 2 years of just struggle. Like it was hard. We decided to put him in nursery really early, I think at the age of like a year and a half, because I just could not cope. I felt like I wasn't giving him what he needed. I did not have the energy to sit and do crafts or to do like sensory play and those kinds of things. And I just thought that, I couldn't do that at home, and I had to give him an environment where I felt like he could flourish. And so sending him to nursery was like the best option, because it gave me those 3 or 4 hours every morning to either go to doctors or different appointments to get different, treatment plans sorted out. It was just, it really, really helped.
So hats off to you to actually recognize that, because I think some mums wouldn't even recognize that they need to do that and take that step to actually put their daughter, your son, in nursery, and actually take that time to actually figure out what's going on with you, because I think that's really important. Sometimes we really forget that part. And so it's amazing that you did that. And I mean, you did 18 months. My daughter went to nursery when she was 11 months. So, I think it's like early is based on what society tells us sometimes. Exactly. And you really have to decide what's right for you and your family. But it's incredible that you actually gave yourself that time, because I think some parents and some mothers will just kind of bear with it just because they've got other things going on. So that's incredible. You mentioned something quite interesting with regards to your son and him not having dairy and gluten. Is that because of your learning and your sort of what you've learned, or is that something that he suffered with and so you decided to go down that route?
So it started off, so we used to give him milk almost till like a year and a half or 2 years. But, it wasn't like over time, he kind of reduced his quantity to like just drinking a little bit at night before bed. But the more I started getting into this and just studying and reading about the sensitivity of various foods and what it's doing to our bodies, we just decided that as a family, we were all like, my husband and I were both already dairy free, that we would just kind of not bring in milk only for him and just transition all of his like smoothies and whatever food preparation that we were doing to like dairy free milk. And yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to say, it really isn't as difficult as it used to be. I mean, my daughter's dairy free as well for different reasons. I mean, my daughter has a cow's milk allergy, which is apparently pretty common and most children grow out of it. But we didn't know for a very long time. So until I have dairy in my diet, and so even when I was breastfeeding, there was dairy in her, obviously, diet because of the breast milk. And so she was constipated for days. Like we would go 7 to 10 days of not going to the bathroom. And obviously with breastfed kids, they go like four times a day, some of them, right? Like they go so frequently. And she just was constipated for weeks on end, to the point where we were having to take her to the hospital, and then they were giving her suppositories to help her go. And I knew that wasn't normal, but we just didn't know what the cause was until we eventually figured out. And we only figured out when we started introducing formula into her diet, that we realized that the symptoms got much worse. And then we and this was very much on me figuring out that actually I think it's a cow's milk allergy. And it's when I then went to the doctor and said, look, I've done this, and this, I've tried this. I've even tried the hypoallergenic milks, and that they don't help either. And I feel that she may have cow's milk allergy is when they actually then sent me to a dietitian, and I spoke to a dietitian, and we went down that route. Until that point, I was just kept, like they said, it was colic, or that it was normal to be constipated. So it's really interesting that you mentioned that. And this isn't anything against medicine. And no disrespect to any of my doctor friends that might be listening to this, because they do incredible work. But I think nutrition and that aspect of it is just something that isn't integrated into their training at the moment. So this is where functional medicine really works and helps, because I think you can really work alongside medical professionals to help a person sort of get to that stage.
Yeah. And you bring up something really important. The fact that medicine now is at such a different crossroads, right? Even like our doctors, and everyone's talking about this. There's so many doctors that are going into functional medicine training and coming out as functional medicine practitioners because of the need. And they're seeing that there's more information put out there. So we're all coming across all of that. And so there's this realization in the medical field that we need that extra training, whether it's just nutrition or the different lens from which to look at wellness from. You mentioned colic in your daughter, or that the doctors were blaming colic for it. My son had it, and everyone said it was normal, right? That this is something that kids go through, but it's actually not, right? When you start looking at it from like a functional medicine perspective, it is not common. I mean, it's common, but it's not normal. And why is it not normal? Because it's basically the body screaming out symptoms, saying that there's something wrong. Work on it, figure it out and work on it. Like you said, your daughter was constipated for so long, and And my son had that. There was a point where my son did not poop for 10 days. And I was just after my doctor, like, what's wrong? And he said it was normal. But just wait it out. Like, he'll poop eventually. It's not normal. And it's one of my favorite questions to ask anyone that I'm working with is, how often do you poop? What does it look like? And, how does it feel, right? Like when you're pooping, is it easy? Is it difficult? Is it painful? It's a difficult, like everyone laughs when I ask that question, because it's not an acceptable kind of a question to ask, like, when you're speaking to somebody, but it's very, very important because it's really like the primary key to understand what is wrong with your body. And our body is always looking at signs and symptoms and giving us those. And it's for us to really interpret them to understand what's going on.
And I think you mentioned something really important there, that actually if it doesn't feel right, there's something wrong, right? Like I knew when my daughter was crying for, it was a very long time she would cry, and a really high pitched cry. And I knew deep down there was something wrong, but having never had a child before and the doctors are telling you it's normal, you kind of doubt yourself. But actually, if it doesn't feel right, there's something probably wrong.
Yeah. And one of the main things that we as like pediatric functional medicine doctors take into account is looking at mama or parents' instincts and trying to take that into consideration, because many, many times it is really the parents who are spending the bulk of the time with the kids. So they kind of know when one cry, like you said, was different than another, or whether they're starting to act off and you can't put a finger on it, but it just doesn't seem right anymore. Or that their color doesn't look good, or that they're starting to pick up like dark circles, or that they're wrinkling under their eyes, they get a new rash. Really, like we really need to rely on our parents' instincts more. And that's what they teach us, especially in our intake forms. They're like, go and ask the parents what's wrong first. What do they think is going on? Not because we're giving up our medical degrees or anything like that, but we're really leaning into our own understanding of what's wrong, right? We can tell better what our triggers are because we live with ourselves and our kids on a near daily basis. And so we need that feedback to really help us understand the underlying issues that they're there.
And I mean, we've mentioned gluten and dairy here, and it doesn't mean that everyone needs to take out gluten and dairy, because that's also another common misunderstanding, isn't it? That gluten and dairy are the causes of all of these things, and they are for some people, but for others, they may not be the trigger foods. Is that right?
Yeah. And that's true. Not everyone is celiac, but then we have so many kids now who have atopy, and that's basically allergies. And what are those allergies? It can be food allergies as well and have sensitivities to food. Having said that, it's just that the milk and the gluten and the wheat that we're consuming now is very, very, very different in its structure, in its form, and its nutrition to what we were eating, to what our families were eating or our grandparents were eating. It just is not the same. And because of that, our bodies have not really evolved to adapt to the modern farming practices. So we're not really able to really fully digest or make sense of what's going into our bodies. And so our body in many cases is seeing these foods as a trigger or as a pathogen or something, as an invader. And the immune system of the body, the first thing it does is it just tries to attack that invader and says, like, it's time to go, like, bye-bye. But it's when we keep eating these things day in and day out is when we're like, just our bodies are reached at like a max point where it just cannot deal with that constant overload of those invaders. And that's where we start really feeling sick, because our immune system starts depressing and getting really weak. And over time, it just becomes into autoimmunity, where our bodies are just depleted, not just in nutrients, but in its function and its ability to protect us.
Yeah, I mean, so when you start to see the ADHD, the asthma, all the other sort of conditions you mentioned earlier? Yeah,
and so a lot of times it's when you because these kids a lot of times are not able to either express what they're going through, and especially kids with autism, they're not very verbal. And so when you ask the parents for a history, and they're gonna be like, oh, there was that point where the kids stopped talking, or the kids started, just like the body was flappy and wasn't just like reacting. Or for ADHD, a lot of times once they hit school, so around the 4, 5, 6 age group, that when they have to go and sit in the class and just, conform to like a normal school system, is when you're triggered and you see that, the kid, there's more hyper behavior in that child. So they're more hypersensitive. And so with different things, you'll have triggers at different points. But the idea is that the body starts giving you signs and symptoms much sooner. And and a lot of times we say that all of this really stems from our gut. And so we'll get a lot of stomach related issues or headaches in kids.
Okay. And so you feel that things like the behavioral conditions such as ADHD and autism, they're not neurological? Do you feel that they are something that can they be resolved, is my question, I guess?
So the new research that's coming out, and especially with the way that functional medicine is looking at it, they're saying that it can be resolved and reversed if the investigation is done correctly, right? So there are certain things that everyone is looking at, especially like there are a lot of champions in autism. And again, one of the underlying rule is that you work with the parents to understand what the kid is going through. But you basically look at not just the genetic susceptibilities, but also look at the function. So we start off with the gut. We try to see why some of these kids, their energy cycle is compromised. And so a lot of times it's stemming from nutrient deficiencies or deficiencies of hormones and cofactors and enzymes that play vital roles in the processes of just providing us energy and making enough ATP, right? And so when those things, when there are deficiencies in that, is really what helps highlight, areas to work on and kind of move towards reversing it. Especially a lot of times, an example that I've seen, and it's amazing that a lot of autistic kids, the moment you put them off of a gluten and dairy diet, within days they start talking, and the parents are just amazed. They're like, my kid was a mute and now he's saying like 2 or 3 words. It's just that when you reduce that toxic load on their body, the body's able to start revving, because our bodies are designed to fix itself, to work, and we're not supposed to live in the state that we are at all times. And I think I'm an example of that. Like you said, your daughter, she had her issues. And so over time, when you address certain triggers and you reduce the load on the body and the immune system, you really start to see results.
Yeah, I mean, I've been a witness to that as well. I mean, as soon as we stopped dairy, within a couple of weeks, we noticed a huge difference, to the point now where if she has, if she's going somewhere and someone gives her a small piece of chocolate or something that has a little bit of milk inside it, she can tolerate it now, but it still has an impact on how her body functions after. She used to get sick all the time before, to the point where she was sick every single week. And you think it's because they're young and they go to nursery and they're going to catch everything, but she was sick a lot. And so when we saw our functional health coach and they went, and the dietitian, and they went through like what the reason was, and she explained exactly what you're explaining, where your body's sort of overwhelmed with the toxins and you're constantly fighting. Your body never gets a chance to rest, repair. And so she used to get sick over and over and over again. And the sickness lasted a very long time as well. And I noticed that since we cut out dairy, that has reduced drastically as well. It's like her immune system is stronger.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's true. And you brought up something important, that our body's constantly under stress, right? And because of that stress and, that state of just like really high cortisol levels in our bodies, and our kids go through that as well, we are seeing a lot of depression and anxiety and stress in our kids, and really, really young kids, where kids in like the 5 to 10 age group are also having massive anxiety attacks.
Wow.
Right? So it's quite alarming, because it just kind of feeds into the kind of lifestyles that we have, right? And the kids are constantly like just soaking it all in. And a lot of times kids are not able to connect the dots like us adults are able to, right? They just don't know. And because of that, they can't regulate their behavior as well. So it's kind of easier also with kids to identify issues. It's because of that, their lack of regulation of how to behave. But in that sense, it's also quite frustrating to see your kid go through that, right? We don't want anyone's kid to have to deal with hypersensitivity, or even like the basic things like eczema or anxiety, or just, constantly feeling overwhelmed and not having an outlet for any of that.
And so you think, anxiety right now is, there are so many studies coming out right now, which is covering anxiety, particularly because of obviously what we've been dealing with as the world has been dealing with. So do you think it's more the lifestyle choices that are adding to the anxiety?
So yeah, food plays a big role, right? So what kind of food that we're eating, again, has such an important role in like the cascade of just basic function. And if I can just give a small example. So our stomach has all of these good bacteria and bad bacteria, but predominantly good bacteria. And one of those bugs makes something called butyrate. And butyrate is an essential component for something made in our brain. So it's called serotonin. It's a neurotransmitter that controls our mood. So imagine if our stomach is not in like optimal condition, we're not making butyrate to make serotonin, and we're just not feeling good, right? And that's really kind of leading into just being either depressed or angry or sad and just not knowing why. It's a very straight physiological example of how our lifestyle is affecting all of that, right? Small things. Our kids are always or predominantly consuming a lot of TV or phones and iPads, and they're just constantly surrounded by all of these things. And the effects of that on our body is just like the EMF radiation that our kids are eating and soaking up constantly. Those also have a very direct impact on our health. And then in addition to that, how much time are they actually spending outdoors or with family and actually building connections? And so all of those things kind of play a part and a piece in that lifestyle that you're talking about. There's so many different elements to address.
And you would go through all of that if someone came to you as a client?
Yes. And a lot more, like sleep and relationships and, just basic everyday life things that the kid feels overwhelmed with. So the children that are slightly older, they're able to verbalize what they're going through a lot better. But the kids that are younger, we would try to regulate their schedules with the parents such that we can really set them up for the best. So a kid who maybe is not sleeping well enough or is not sleeping through the night or is having very disturbed sleep, they will have issues when they wake up in the morning. So kind of just working with fixing that circadian rhythm in children, make sure they sleep on time, wake up at the same time, that they're fed well, and then understand if they're not sleeping well, why are they not sleeping well, right? So it's just really working through the very many pieces of that child's life and making my way through that with the families.
Yeah. And I think, you mentioned they're not sleeping well when they're not feeling well. And that was exactly the same with our daughter as well. She would have really restless sleeps. She would wake up so many times in the night. And as soon as we cut out the dairy, we noticed the difference. Like, it was incredible to see how much of an impact it was actually having on her body. And I guess they're so young and they're so small. Like, we're really, if we're adding toxins to their body, it's really incredible. And this isn't to say that all dairy is bad for everybody, but
no,
for some children it is. I'm fine with dairy, my daughter's not. So it's really interesting to see that different people react differently to different things. Just because we're talking about dairy, I had a question, more of a personal question, but what would you advise as a good alternative to dairy then?
So they have, for kids, I've seen a lot of people giving them the pea protein.
Yeah.
Because it's really high in protein, right? So one of the reasons why a lot of parents like to give milk to kids is because of not just protein, but it being a calcium source. And so I really don't recommend giving a lot of like almond milk or oat milk and those kinds of things. So really trying to look at alternative sources of food and try to give your kid a more balanced diet. So we can get a lot of calcium from broccoli and, you know, and other food sources like peppers and spinach. And like, so our food is just really food dense. Sesame seeds have like a quarter cup of sesame seeds has more calcium than a glass of milk. So we have like all these alternate food items that we can eat that we can just really nourish our kids with. In our house, when we move our kid away from my son from having milk, I mean, we do give it to, like, we will give him like a milk alternative. Like if he wants like chocolate milk, for example, we'll make some in oat milk or almond milk, but it's kind of like a treat every now and then. We try to move him away from using milk as a primary source of nutrition. But I do understand that there's some kids that are under 2 that are very emotionally attached to their milk. And so for them, giving them like an alternate like pea protein milk is a great idea because it's high in protein for them if they're still not eating a ton.
Yeah, I mean, we transitioned my daughter when she was about 8 to 9 months is when we stopped giving her like formula, and so it was pea protein that we sort of switched to. She loves oat milk, I guess because it's quite creamy tasting, but pea milk is actually, some brands of pea milk are like, I think they taste good as well, and she drinks it, so it's fine. Also, we compare it to normal milk, and obviously they don't, because they don't know what normal milk tastes like.
Exactly. Yeah. But so another interesting thing though is that we also look at where the milk allergy is coming from. So whether these kids are either lactose intolerant or whether these kids have an allergy to casein. So a lot of cow's milk is, we get A1 casein from cow's milk. But we can get A2 casein from goat's milk, sheep's milk, or other, like there's camel milk as well. And so we can tolerate those milks a lot better than cow's milk. So we could always also convert just drinking cow's milk to goat's milk or sheep's milk, or even camel's milk, which is supposed to be really good, and seeing how they react. It probably is because our bodies are not exposed as much to those milks the way that we are to cow's milk, and it hasn't been changed as much. You know, our cows are just receiving so many different stimuli to produce more and more milk, which goats and sheep milk are not exposed to as much. And so for now, that's also another great alternative to explore.
So let's talk about probiotics, because I mean, we hear about the gut-brain barrier all the time. And yeah, tell me more about probiotics. What are they? How do they help? And yeah, we'll go into what kind of probiotics we should be using.
So probiotics, I like to have people think about there being good bugs in our stomach. So they basically, and they're not just in our tummy. So they start from all the way from our mouth all the way down to our rectum. So that entire pipe, which includes our stomach and our intestines, everything. And we have bugs there. And so they're called our microbiota. So basically these good bacteria are there to kind of help us, starting from our mouth all the way down in various different capacities. They're there to digest our food, to maintain our pH, you know, to act as cofactors for various enzymes and neurotransmitters and hormones. So they play a big role. And we have so many, we've got millions and millions of these bacteria in our body. So there's a joke that goes on in the functional medicine group that, you know, we're actually more bacteria than human because there's so many more of them in our body than our cells even. And so they're really important to keep a good balance of them. So to make sure that we have more good gut bacteria than the bad ones. But what tends to happen is that over time, as we, you know, with food, So we have sensitivities to food, or we have all of these different toxins and heavy metals that are coming into our bodies. What that tends to do is create something called dysbiosis, and that's like the imbalance of the bacteria. So there's a lot more bad bacteria that we're having rather than good. And because of that is really where we begin this cascade of feeling unwell. And not having enough good bacteria affects pretty much every function in our body, starting not just only from digestion and absorption of nutrients, but like I said, making basic vital, hormones and enzymes and other things like that. And so with probiotic, it's very important to consume in our diet because it's something that we don't store. The good thing is these bacteria, they don't colonate our gut. So, and that's a good thing, because if they're the bad ones and if they start colonizing our gut, then we have a massive problem. So we have to constantly provide our body with these sources of food. A lot of times I like to recommend that families just use food as their sources of probiotics. So I recommend using good qualities of yogurt. So Greek yogurt is really high in that. I actually recommend that if we can make our yogurt at home from live cultures. So the yogurt that we make at home tends to be higher in probiotic by millions and millions, right? Wow. So than the store-bought kind, because in the entire pasteurization process, a lot of the bacteria is killed. And so we don't really get the benefit of it that we should be getting. The other sources are kefir grains or kefir milk. So we get a lot of that in supermarkets now. For those that are dairy-free, they have a coconut version of that from coconut milk. Then there's sauerkraut and there's kimchi and eating fermented foods. And it's really just kind of incorporating a lot of these fermented foods in our bodies so that we are bringing in those live microorganisms, so all of those bacteria into our gut. And so that it's a symbiotic relationship. They get food down there and we get all the benefits that they do. So it's really just kind of adapting the way that we're seeing our meals and making sure that we're adding all of those good things to our diet.
And how often would you say you should be eating those things? Every day or a couple of times a day?
So every day. So we're including that in our meals and making sure that we find ways to do that. Apart from small things like miso or tempeh, like a lot of people who don't eat grains, they'll go towards like alternative grains and things to eat. So they'll try to incorporate a lot more miso or tempeh or other grains. Some cheeses that age really well, so like Gouda or cottage cheese or even mozzarella, they have live strains of probiotics. So it's really kind of understanding where all we can find them. Kombucha is a really good alternative as well. I think a lot of grown-ups drink that. I think we kind of caution giving too much to children just because of the fermentation of the alcohols in there. So, but giving them a little bit is not a bad thing, but it's just about being aware of these foods and creating them and putting them on a rotation in our house really helps.
And what about the sachets, the powder sachets of probiotics that you get? What about if you wanted to do that, just because then you know that, you may do the things during the day as well, but you just want to make sure that the child gets all of the probiotics?
Yeah, and that was something I was going to get to as well, that even though we try to eat as much as we can in our diet, it still most likely is not enough, especially with all of the toxins that we're constantly consuming. They're working extra hard, and we're bringing in along with our foods a lot of the things that the bad bugs that are coming with that. And so for supplements, they really do say to look at good quality supplements. It doesn't really matter if it's like a sachet, if it's a liquid, or if it's a pill. For kids, I recommend that they have these chewables. I'm not really like 100. I know you're a dentist and you don't agree with chewables, and neither do I, because they're not very potent. You don't really get what you need out of those. But in some cases, so there's some brands that really do make good ones that actually have all of the ingredients that we want. But a lot of times what I recommend is just opening the capsule and using the grains from that in like a smoothie or water or milk or juice, whatever that they're consuming, because we can buy varieties that have no flavor. So it's just you're adding it to their food and making them, just getting the benefit of it. What I do want to encourage is that families should start looking at the labels and making sure that they have the right strains of probiotics. So lactobacilli is one of those that are very important, and bifidobacter. Those are two that are really important because they really help with something that we call leaky gut, where the cells in our gut lining are very porous. So we're soaking up a lot of toxins. And just, using all of that and making sure that they're there at the back of the bottle. We read that. We make sure that it's got the good manufacturing products, label there, and that we make sure that it has the potency that they claim on the label. So you really read that and see. And I always recommend that families, even for small children and children as young as a few weeks old to a few months old, can have probiotic very, very safely. That we kind of give them a supplement that is starting off at like a 5 billion CFU, so colony CFUs. And so making sure that those numbers are there, and also to make sure that as we get older, so for a higher age group, anywhere after 2 years old, they recommend that they can use the adult dose. So you can give them anywhere up to like 25 billion as well, CFUs. And so just making sure that we kind of read the label, understand the label, see the different strains, right? A lot of times I've seen that they only have the lactobacilli, and that's just not enough. Especially when we don't really know what's going on with our gut. So it's better to kind of have a complete, complete focus of what all we can put in, rather than just taking it one at a time. Sometimes we might not be able to get all of them in one supplement. And for that, I think it's good to kind of read the other labels and maybe mix and match your probiotics. Another thing that's really big, and I know it's not probiotic, but it's something called prebiotic. And it's something that really kind of sets the baseline for your gut. And prebiotic are those ingredients that it's basically their fiber in our diet that we put in our gut. And it's our probiotics eat them and use them for their food. But they basically allow the probiotic to stick and to do their work. So we're basically setting up like the ground for harvest, basically. We're setting up that the grounds that we're going to be putting our probiotic on is as nourished as possible. So we're giving it the probiotic. And there's a lot of focus on that. And so you can supplement, and some supplements even have that. And you'll most likely see it by the name of inulin at the bottom of your list of ingredients. But we get a lot of that from food. And so again, going back to that idea of food is medicine, getting it through onions and garlics and artichokes. And, there's so many other options out there that we can eat them, making sure we're getting enough asparagus and a lot of these cabbage family vegetables. So Brussels sprouts and broccoli and cauliflower, and consuming them on a daily basis to make sure that we're able to benefit from all of that.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. I know you have a few things to do today, so I'm not going to keep you much longer. I have one question for you though. If you had to recommend one supplement that all children should be taking, what would it be?
So I really, really like, I can't really say one because, there are a few that are really important. Unfortunately, in our multivitamin, the packs that we get, they're just not enough.
Yeah.
But it's really important to give our kids good omega-3s, so a fish oil supplement. Probiotics is really important. And then making sure that their vitamin D levels are optimal. So we're not, either that we're mostly not supplementing, but even if we are supplementing, we need to supplement them enough. So, I would encourage you to either speak to a doctor, get them tested, or just amp up their supplementation. And then the last one that's really, really important is zinc. So, it has such an important role to play, not just in our gut health, but our immune health and just overall regulation of all of the processes that our body has. So I really can't understate that as well. So sorry, from 1 I went to 4, but it's just making sure that our numbers and the dosages that we're using and eating.
We only had a certain amount of time to talk about these things, but you share a lot of more of this on your Instagram page. So where is the best place to find you? Is it your Instagram page?
So it is my Instagram page, and it's my name, Momina, and it's _Salim_coaching. You can probably add that to your show notes, but that's really the best place. And really, like, I'm there to kind of help and share and just help families really hold their hands through. It's a scary world we're living in these days.
Yeah, and I will definitely share all your details in the show notes so the listeners can find you easily. And I'm sure you'll be happy to receive messages if someone's got a question for you.
Oh, for sure. I love to chat.
You're amazing. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This is great.